The bitter Wyoming wind cut through Clara Merritt's threadbare shawl like 1,000 icy knives. She pulled her young son closer against her chest, his small body the only warmth she'd felt in days. The boy, barely 3 winters old, had stopped crying hours ago, whether from exhaustion or the numbing cold. She couldn't tell. They'd been walking since dawn, following the rutted wagon trail that led away from what used to be their home. Behind them, smoke still rose from the charred remains of their small ranch, the acrid smell clinging to their clothes like a curse. The men who'd come collecting her late husband's debts had been thorough in their destruction. They'd taken what little livestock remained, burned the rest, and told her in no uncertain terms that the land now belonged to Mr. Harlan, the territory's most ruthless creditor. Widow Merritt, they'd sneered. Your husband died owing more than this patch of dirt is worth. Count yourself lucky we're letting you leave with your lives. Lucky. Clara almost laughed at the memory, but the sound died in her throat. Her husband, Samuel, had been dead less than a month, found in the county jail with a rope around his neck. They said suicide, the sheriff claimed, though Clara had her doubts. Samuel had many faults, his love for cards and whiskey chief among them, but he'd never been a coward. The town of Cold Pine appeared through the swirling snow like a mirage. Wooden buildings huddled together against the storm, their windows glowing with lamplight that promised warmth she couldn't afford. Clara's boots, split at the seams, squelched through the muddy main street as she searched for any sign of charity. At Morrison's general store, she hesitated before pushing open the door. The bell above jangled, and every head turned to stare. Conversation stopped mid-sentence. Mrs. Morrison, a stern woman with steel-gray hair, looked up from her ledger with pursed lips. "We don't extend credit," she said before Clara could speak, "especially not to the wives of gamblers and debtors." "Please," Clara's voice came out as barely a whisper. "Just some bread. My boy hasn't eaten since yesterday." "That's not our concern." "Mr." Morrison appeared from behind the counter, his thick arms crossed. "Your husband's reputation preceded him, and now it follows you. Best move along before you bring more trouble to our doorstep." The other customers nodded in agreement, their faces masks of righteous judgment. A woman Clara recognized from church, they'd shared hymn books once, turned away as if Clara's misfortune might be contagious. Outside again. Clara stumbled through the snow, her son's weight growing heavier with each step. The child stirred, his blue lips forming the word "mama" before falling silent again. Fear clawed at her chest. She needed shelter, needed food, needed a miracle. The saloon's warmth beckoned, but she knew better than to enter. A widow in a saloon was asking for the kind of trouble she couldn't afford. Instead, she tried the church, only to find its doors locked tight against the storm, and against the likes of her. By the time darkness fell, Clara had been turned away from every establishment in Cold Pine. Her legs trembled with exhaustion, and she could no longer feel her feet. The boy in her arms had gone terrifyingly still. She'd failed him, failed as a mother, failed as everything. The storm intensified as she staggered toward the edge of town, where the forest began. Perhaps if she could find some shelter among the trees, build a small fire. But she had no matches, no axe, no hope. The wind howled like a living thing, driving snow into her face until she could barely see. That's when she saw it, a faint light flickering through the trees. Not the town behind her, but something ahead, deeper in the woods. A cabin, perhaps, or maybe her mind playing tricks, leading her to a frozen death in the wilderness. Either way, she had no choice but to follow it. The path, if it could be called that, wound through towering pines heavy with snow. More than once. Clara stumbled and nearly dropped her precious burden. Her strength was failing, her body beginning that dangerous warm feeling that meant the cold was winning. The light grew brighter, solidified into the unmistakable glow of a window. A cabin sat in a small clearing, smoke rising from its chimney in a way that made her mouth water with the thought of warmth. But whose cabin? And would they be any more welcoming than the good people of Cold Pine? Clara made it to the heavy wooden door before her legs gave out entirely. She fell to her knees in the snow, clutching her son, and managed 3 weak knocks before darkness crept in from the edges of her vision. The door opened, spilling golden firelight across the snow. A tall figure stood silhouetted against the warmth. A man, broad-shouldered and still. He looked down at the woman and child collapsed on his doorstep, his face unreadable in the shadows. Luke Carver had lived alone in these woods for 5 years, keeping to himself, avoiding the complications that came with other people. He'd built this cabin with his own hands, far enough from Cold Pine that no one bothered him, close enough that he could trade for supplies when necessary. The solitude suited him fine. The memories couldn't find him here, or so he'd told himself. Now, trouble had literally fallen at his feet in the form of a half-frozen woman and child. He could see the desperation written in every line of the woman's body, the way she curled protectively around the boy even as consciousness fled. He could turn them away, let the storm take them. It would be the easier choice, the safer choice. Instead, Luke bent down and lifted them both. The woman weighed almost nothing, bird bones and desperation. The child was so still he might have been a doll. Luke carried them inside, kicking the door shut against the wind. He laid them before the massive stone fireplace, close enough to thaw, but not so close as to burn. The woman's face was pale as death, her lips blue, ice crystals in her dark lashes. Pretty, he noted with detachment, beneath the dirt and desperation. Young, too. The boy looked to be about 3, with the same dark hair as his mother. Luke knew enough about cold to know they needed warmth, and fast. He added more wood to the fire, then fetched thick buffalo robes from his bed. As he wrapped them around the woman and child, she stirred slightly, her eyes fluttering open. "Please," she whispered, her voice raw. "My son. He's breathing," Luke said shortly. It was true. The boy's chest rose and fell, though whether he'd survive the night was another question. "You're both half frozen." Clara tried to sit up, failed, tried again. The room spun around her, but she forced herself to focus on the man who'd taken them in. He was perhaps 10 years older than her own 23 years, with sandy hair that needed cutting and a face that might have been handsome if it weren't set in such hard lines. A scar ran from his left temple down to his jaw, white against sun-weathered skin. His eyes were gray as winter sky, and just as cold. "Thank you," she managed through chattering teeth. I'm Clara Merritt. This is my son, James. We don't mean to impose, just until the storm passes." "Luke Carver," he said, though he didn't extend his hand. "And the storm won't pass for days, from the look of it." He moved to the kitchen area, returning with a cup of something hot. Broth, she realized as he helped her sit up enough to sip it. The warmth spread through her chest like liquid life. When James stirred and whimpered, Luke prepared a second cup, cooled with snow. "Drink slow," he ordered, his voice gruff. "Both of you, too fast and you'll be sick." Clara did as he said, watching this strange, scarred man who'd saved them. His movements were efficient, practiced, like someone accustomed to caring for himself and no one else. The cabin, she noticed, was sparse but well-built. Tools hung neatly on the walls, furs and supplies stacked with military precision. A rifle rested above the fireplace, and another leaned by the door. "You live alone?" she said. It wasn't a question. "By choice," Luke replied. He crouched by the fire, adding another log. "Where's your husband?" Clara's hand stilled on the cup. "Dead a month past." Luke's eyes flicked to her, taking in her worn dress. The absence of a wedding ring, pawned weeks ago for food. The boy's father? Yes. She lifted her chin slightly, ready for judgment, for the assumptions that would follow. But Luke merely nodded and turned back to the fire. "You running from something or to something?" "From," Clara admitted. "The ranch was seized for debts. We had nowhere else to go. So you decided to walk into a blizzard with a child? Anger flared in her chest, warming her more than the broth. I decided to survive. Cold pine made it clear we weren't welcome. I saw your light. Lucky for you that you did. Luke stood, towering over her. Another hour and you'd both be frozen corpses. The brutal honesty of it made her shiver. James whimpered again, and she pulled him closer, relieved to feel warmth returning to his small body. We'll leave as soon as the storm breaks, Clara said quietly. I don't want to be a burden. Luke studied her for a long moment. This woman who'd rather walk into a killing storm than beg for charity. There was steel beneath that fragile exterior. He realized. Steel and stubborn pride. Storm won't break for days. He repeated. You'll stay until it does. After that, he shrugged. After that, you'll need a plan that doesn't involve freezing to death. Clara wanted to protest, wanted to maintain some shred of dignity, but exhaustion was pulling her under again. The warmth, the safety, the simple relief of being out of the wind, it was all too much. Her eyes began to close. Sleep, Luke said. And for the first time, his voice held something that might have been kindness. You're no good to the boy, Dad. As Clara drifted off, still clutching James, she heard Luke moving around the cabin, the sounds of a man preparing for unexpected guests. The last thing she remembered was his silhouette against the fire, standing guard like some gruff angel in this unlikely sanctuary. Outside, the storm raged on. But inside, Luke Carver's cabin, a widow and her son slept peacefully for the first time in weeks, unaware that their arrival had set in motion a chain of events that would change all their lives forever. Clara woke to the sound of wood being split outside. For a moment, she couldn't place where she was. The bed was too soft, the air too warm. Then memory flooded back. The storm, the cabin, the scarred man who'd saved them. James lay curled against her side, his breathing deep and even. Color had returned to his cheeks, and when she pressed her hand to his forehead, she found no fever. Relief made her weak. The cabin was empty but for them. Pale morning light filtered through frost-covered windows, revealing more details than she'd noticed the night before. Everything spoke of a man who lived by routine and discipline. No photographs, no mementos, nothing that suggested a life before this self-imposed exile. The door opened, bringing a blast of cold air and Luke Carver himself, arms loaded with firewood. He glanced at her, noted she was awake, and went about stacking the wood without a word. How long did we sleep? Clara asked, sitting up carefully. Near about 14 hours. Luke brushed snow from his coat. Storm still blowing. Won't let up for days. Like I said. Clara stood, testing her strength. Her body ached, but the bone-deep cold was gone. Is there something I can do to help? Luke turned to study her. In daylight, she could see him more clearly, the gray eyes that seemed to look through rather than at her, the way he held himself like a man ready for trouble. You cook? Yes. Then you can make breakfast. Supplies are there. He gestured to a corner cupboard. I'll be outside. He left before she could respond. Clara found the cupboard well stocked with basics: flour, salt pork, beans, coffee. She set about making a simple meal, grateful for something to do with her hands. James woke as the smell of cooking filled the cabin. Mama? His voice was small but clear. Where are we? Somewhere safe, Clara told him, smoothing his dark hair. A kind man helped us. I'm hungry. I know, sweetheart. Food's almost ready. When Luke returned, he found the table set for 3, steam rising from plates of biscuits and fried pork. He stood in the doorway, seeming surprised by the domestic scene. Sit, Clara said, then caught herself. I mean, if you'd like, it's your table. Luke sat. They ate in silence at first, James watching the stranger with wide eyes. Finally, the boy asked, Are you a soldier? Luke's hand stilled on his cup. Was, long time ago. My PA said soldiers were brave. Your PA was wrong. Luke's voice was flat. Nothing brave about killing, just necessary sometimes. Clara shot him a warning look, but James seemed unbothered. Children, she reflected, often understood harsh truths better than adults. After breakfast, Luke surprised her by fashioning a small wooden horse from a piece of kindling, giving it to James without comment. The boy's delighted smile was the first real happiness Clara had seen from him in weeks. "Thank you," she said quietly when James had settled by the fire with his new toy. Luke shrugged. Boy needs something to do. Can't have him underfoot. But Clara had seen the careful way he'd carved the toy, the patience in his hands. There was kindness in this man, buried deep beneath the granite exterior. The day passed strangely. Luke went about his usual routine, checking trap lines near the cabin, reinforcing the woodpile, tending to the horse and mule in the lean-to shelter. Clara cleaned, mended what needed mending, and tried to make herself useful without overstepping. It was after dinner, with James asleep again, that Luke finally spoke more than single sentences. "You can't go back to Cold Pine." Clara looked up from the socks she was darning. One of his. She'd found a basket of mending. "I know." "Where will you go?" "I don't know." The admission hurt. "East, maybe. I have a cousin in St. Louis. If I can find the money for passage." "You don't have money for passage." Again, that brutal honesty. Clara set down the mending. "No, I don't." Luke poured himself coffee, then surprised her by pouring a second cup for her. "What skills do you have, besides cooking and mending?" "I can read and write. I taught school before I married. I can keep accounts, tend animals, work a garden." She lifted her chin. "I'm not afraid of hard work." "Didn't say you were." Luke stared into the fire. "Cold Pine won't be the only town that turns you away. Widow with a child, no money, no connections. You'll find the same welcome everywhere." "Then what do you suggest?" The question came out sharper than she intended. "That I give up? That I find some convenient cliff to throw myself from?" "I suggest you think practical." Luke's gray eyes fixed on her. "You need protection, a name that carries weight, a reason for folks to think twice before they treat you like dirt." Clara's heart began to pound. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying you could stay here, but not as my charity case." He set down his cup with deliberate precision. "Only if you agree to be my wife." The words hung in the air between them like a challenge. Clara felt the blood drain from her face. "Your wife. In name, legal, binding." Luke's expression remained impassive. "I provide shelter, food, protection. You provide companionship, I suppose, someone to talk to when the silence gets too loud, someone to keep the cabin warm. And in return, you're Mrs. Luke Carver, not Widow Merritt. My wife wouldn't be turned away from stores. My wife's son wouldn't go hungry." Clara's hands trembled. "Why? Why would you offer this?" For the first time, something flickered across Luke's features. Pain, perhaps, or memory. "I had a family once, a wife, a daughter. They're gone now. 5 years passed. This cabin's too quiet. Maybe I'm tired of the quiet. So I'm to be, what, a replacement?" "No." The word was sharp. "They can't be replaced. But you need something I can provide. And maybe I need something you can offer. It's a practical arrangement." Clara stood abruptly, pacing to the window. Outside, snow continued to fall, erasing all traces of the world beyond this cabin. People would talk. They'd say I trapped you, that I'm a scheming widow who... Let them talk. Luke's voice was hard. "Their words can't hurt you if you're under my protection." She turned to face him. "And what would you expect from this marriage?" Luke met her gaze steadily. "A partner, someone to share the work, someone to make sure I don't turn into a complete hermit, nothing you're not willing to give." "And if I say no?" "Then you leave when the storm breaks. I'll give you what supplies I can spare. You take your chances out there." He gestured toward the window. "But we both know what those chances are." Clara thought of James, sleeping peacefully for the first time in weeks. Thought of the cold reception in Cold Pine, the burned ranch, the empty road ahead. Pride was a luxury she couldn't afford. "I need time to think." "Take it." Luke stood. "I'll be in the barn." After he left, Clara sat by the fire, wrestling with the choice that wasn't really a choice at all. She could accept this strange, cold proposition from a man she barely knew, or she could face the world alone with a child to protect. She thought about Luke Carver, the careful way he'd carved the toy horse, the pain that flickered in his eyes when he spoke of his lost family. He wasn't offering love, had been clear about that, but perhaps he was offering something more valuable: survival. When Luke returned, snow dusting his shoulders, Clara was waiting. "I accept," she said simply, "but I have conditions." Luke raised an eyebrow, perhaps surprised she'd negotiate. "Such as?" "James is to be treated as your son in all ways. His education, his upbringing. He's not to be made to feel unwanted." "Agreed." "I'll need fabric for proper clothes. I won't be kept looking like a beggar. There's money for necessities." And Clara hesitated, then forged ahead. "The marriage is to be legal, but a marriage of convenience only, until we both agree otherwise." Something that might have been amusement touched Luke's mouth. "Agreed. Anything else?" "Yes." Clara met his gaze squarely. "I'll need to know about you, your past. If I'm to be your wife, I won't live with a stranger." Luke was quiet for a long moment. "In time. Some stories aren't for the telling all at once." It wasn't the answer she wanted, but Clara sensed it was all she'd get. "When?" "There's a preacher comes through these parts, old Tom Baxter. He'll be by within the week, storm permitting. We can make it legal then." Clara nodded, feeling as if she were stepping off a cliff into darkness. "All right." They stood awkwardly, two strangers who'd just agreed to bind their lives together. "Finally," Luke said. "You should know, I'm not an easy man to live with. I have my ways, my silences. Sometimes I don't talk for days." "I'm not looking for easy," Clara replied. "Just possible." Luke studied her, this slight woman with steel in her spine. "Then we understand each other." As if to seal their strange bargain, he extended his hand. Clara took it, feeling the calluses, the strength, the steadiness of him. His hand was warm, solid, real, an anchor in her storm-tossed world. "Wife," he said, as if testing the word. "Husband," she replied, and wondered what she'd just agreed to. The preacher arrived 6 days later, just as Luke had predicted. Tom Baxter was a grizzled man in his 60s who traveled the mountain circuits, marrying folks and burying them with equal solemnity. He showed no surprise at finding a woman and child in Luke Carver's cabin. "About time you took another wife." "Luke," was all he said, shaking snow from his coat. Man wasn't meant to live alone. The ceremony was brief, witnessed only by the wind and James, who watched with solemn eyes as his mother spoke vows to a stranger. Clara wore her cleanest dress, though it was still patched and worn. Luke had put on what must have been his best shirt. Neither of them smiled. "Do you, Luke Matthew Carver, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" "I do." "And do you, Clara Rose Merritt, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Clara's voice caught slightly. "I do." Tom Baxter pronounced them married, wrote their names in his leather-bound register, and stayed for dinner. He brought news from the outside world, tales of Indian troubles to the north, railroad expansion, the death of old Marcus Wells who'd run the Cold Pine Bank. "His son Harlan's taken over," Tom said, accepting another helping of beans. "Harder man than his father. Been calling in debts left and right." Luke and Clara exchanged glances. Harlan Wells, the man who'd burned her ranch, who held Samuel's markers, after Tom left, promising to spread word of the marriage. An awkward silence fell. They were legally wed now, bound by law, if not by love. Clara busied herself with cleaning while Luke tended to evening chores. James, sensing the strange tension, clung close to his mother. That night, Luke surprised her. "You'll take the bed. James, too. I'll make a pallet by the fire." "That's not necessary." "It is." His tone brooked no argument. "We have an agreement. So began their strange marriage. Days fell into a routine that was both foreign and oddly comforting. Luke rose before dawn, saw to the animals, checked his trap lines. Clara cooked, cleaned, began teaching James his letters using charcoal on flat stones. They ate meals together. Speaking of practical things, the need for more firewood, the dwindling flour supply, the storm damage to the chicken coop. It was 2 weeks into their marriage when the first test came. Luke returned from checking traps with his left arm bloody, deep gashes running from shoulder to elbow. "Wolf," he said shortly, dropping into a chair. Disagreed about who owned the rabbit in the trap. Clara moved without thinking, gathering what medical supplies the cabin held. "James, bring water, hot water." The boy hurried to obey while Clara cut away Luke's torn shirt. The wounds were deep but clean, parallel tears that could have been much worse. "Hold still," she ordered, beginning to clean the gashes. Luke gritted his teeth but didn't make a sound as she worked. Clara had tended injuries before. Samuel had come home bloodied more than once from fights over card games. But this was different. She was acutely aware of Luke's warmth, the way his muscles tensed under her touch, the trust it took for a man like him to let another tend his wounds. "You've done this before," Luke observed. "My father was a doctor. I helped him sometimes, before he died." Clara threaded a needle with steady hands. "This will hurt. Can't hurt worse than getting it." She began to stitch, neat small sutures that would minimize scarring. Luke watched her face as she worked, noting the concentration, the gentle competence. When she finished, wrapping his arm in clean cloth, their eyes met. "Thank you," he said quietly. "You're my husband." Clara replied. "Tending your wounds comes with the territory." Something shifted between them in that moment, a recognition, perhaps, that whatever began as necessity was becoming something else. As winter deepened, the cabin became a world unto itself. Snow piled to the windows, and days passed without sight of another soul. Luke taught James to whittle, showing endless patience as small hands struggled with the knife. Clara discovered Luke's small library, a dozen precious books he'd carried with him into exile. She read aloud in the evenings, the words of Shakespeare and Defoe filling the cabin with other worlds. One particularly bitter night, with the wind howling like demons around the eaves, James woke screaming from nightmares. Clara tried to comfort him, but the boy cried for his father, for their old home, for everything lost. Luke appeared in the doorway, took in the situation, and did something unexpected. He sat on the bed and began to speak, his voice low and rhythmic. "When I was a boy, younger than you, I was afraid of storms. My mother would tell me stories about brave warriors who rode the wind, who made friends with the thunder. She said fear was just loneliness wearing a scary mask." James's sobs quieted as he listened. Luke continued, weaving a tale of adventure that drew the child in, made him forget his terror. Clara watched, seeing a gentleness in her husband she hadn't suspected. When James finally slept again, Luke stood to go, but Clara caught his hand. "Thank you," she whispered. Luke looked down at their joined hands, seemed about to say something, then simply nodded and returned to his pallet by the fire. But sleep eluded Clara. She lay listening to the storm, thinking about this man she'd married, the violence he was capable of. She'd seen the scars, the weapons, the way he moved like a predator when startled, yet also this unexpected tenderness, these moments when the hard shell cracked to reveal something wounded but not broken. Days later, Luke returned from Cold Pine with supplies and news that made Clara's blood run cold. "Harlan Wells was asking about you, knows you're here, knows we're married." Clara's hands stilled on the bread she was kneading. "What did he say?" "Said he's not finished with the merit accounts. Said marriage doesn't erase debts." Luke's face was granite. "He's wrong about that. Luke, you're my wife now. His claim died with your first husband." Luke hung up his coat with careful movements. But men like Wells don't always respect the law. That night, Clara noticed Luke cleaning his rifles with extra care, checking ammunition, preparing. The wolf that had attacked him was nothing compared to the human predators circling. I won't have you fighting my battles, Clara said quietly after James was asleep. Luke looked up from the Winchester across his lap. You became my battles when you became my wife. This isn't what you agreed to. Wells is dangerous. So am I. The words were said simply. Statement of fact. Clara, there's something you should know. About before. About why I live out here. Clara sat across from him, waiting. I was cavalry. 7th Regiment. 5 years ago, we were ordered to clear out a Cheyenne village. Peaceful village. Women and children. Luke's hands stilled on the rifle. I refused the order. Others didn't. The cabin seemed to hold its breath. My wife was part Cheyenne. Her mother's people. She was visiting her cousin that day. Had our daughter with her. His voice remained steady, but Clara saw the cost of each word. I tried to stop it. Killed 2 of my own men. Wasn't enough. Sarah and little Mary died with the others. Luke, Clara breathed, but he continued. I hunted down the rest. Every man who was there that day. Took me 6 months. When I was done, I came here. Built this place. Figured I'd earned my solitude. Clara understood now. The isolation, the hardness, the way he looked at James sometimes with such pain. And now, she asked softly, now I have something to protect again. Luke met her eyes. I failed before. Won't fail again. Clara rose, moved around the table, and did something that surprised them both. She placed her hand on his scarred cheek, felt him go utterly still beneath her touch. We protect each other, she said firmly. That's what marriage means. For a moment, Luke leaned into her touch, his eyes closing. Then he pulled back, the walls sliding back into place. You should sleep. Tomorrow I'll teach you to shoot. But Clara didn't move away. She saw the struggle in him, the desire to remain frozen in grief, warring with the unwilling thaw her presence brought. Luke, she said quietly, Sarah wouldn't want you to die with her. He flinched as if struck. You don't know what she'd want. I know she loved you, and those who love us want us to live, not just survive. Luke stood abruptly, the chair scraping. For a moment, Clara thought he might leave, disappear into the night as he sometimes did when the memories pressed too close. Instead, he stood rigid, hands clenched. I see her sometimes, in the corner of my eye, her and Mary both. His voice was raw. Then I turn, and it's you and James. And He stopped, unable to continue. Clara understood. The guilt of moving forward, the fear of replacing the irreplaceable, the terrible hope that life might hold something beyond mere endurance. We're not them, she said gently. We never could be. But we're here. We're alive. And maybe that's enough. Luke looked at her then. Really looked at her. Not as a burden taken in from the storm. Not as a practical arrangement. But as Clara, his wife. The woman who stitched his wounds and challenged his silences and brought warmth back to his frozen world. Teach me to shoot, Clara said, breaking the charged moment. If trouble's coming, I want to be ready. Something that might have been pride flickered across Luke's face. First light, then, you'll need to know how to defend yourself. As Clara prepared for bed, she realized the cabin felt different. Less like a shelter, more like a home. The transformation was fragile, built on necessity and growing trust, but it was real. Outside, wolves howled in the distance, and the wind spoke of more storms to come. But inside, a family, unconventional, wounded, but undeniably bound together, prepared to face whatever came next. Spring came slowly to the Wyoming mountains, revealing the world inch by muddy inch. Clara had become a fair shot under Luke's tutelage, though she prayed she'd never need the skill. The Winchester felt foreign in her hands, but she understood its necessity in this wild place. Their days had found a rhythm that felt almost natural. Luke still retreated into his silences, but they were softer now, less absolute. Sometimes Clara caught him watching her as she taught James arithmetic or mended clothes by lamplight. When their eyes met, he no longer always looked away. It was an evening in early April when everything changed. Clara was brushing her hair before the small mirror, a nightly ritual she'd maintained even through the hardest times. The brush was one of her few remaining possessions from her former life, silver-backed, a wedding gift from Samuel's mother. She didn't hear Luke approach until he stood directly behind her, his reflection joining hers in the glass. They hadn't been this close since the night she'd tended his wolf wounds. Clara's hand stilled, the brush suspended in mid-stroke. "Your hair," Luke said quietly. "It catches the light." Such a simple observation, but Clara felt it like a physical touch. In the mirror, she watched his hand rise, hesitate, then gently touch a strand that had escaped her braid. The gesture was so tentative, so unlike the sure movements of a man who could skin a deer in minutes or shoot a target at 50 yards. "Luke," she breathed, not knowing what she was asking. He met her eyes in the mirror, and she saw the war there, desire fighting with guilt, need battling against the walls he'd built. Slowly, as if she might spook like a wild creature, Clara turned to face him. They stood inches apart, the air between them charged with possibility. Luke's hand still rested near her hair, and Clara could feel the warmth of him, smell the pine smoke and leather that always clung to his clothes. "Clara, He stopped, struggling for words. "I didn't plan for this. Neither did I," she admitted, her heart hammered against her ribs, but not from fear. "Luke, I'm not asking you to forget her. Sarah, I'm not asking to take her place." "I know." His voice was rough. "That's what makes it harder. You're not trying to be her. You're just... you..." The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. Then Luke's hand moved to cup her cheek, his thumb brushing across her cheekbone with impossible gentleness. Clara leaned into the touch, her eyes closing. "I'm frightened," she whispered, surprising herself with the admission. "Of me? Of feeling again, of hoping." She opened her eyes, found his gray gaze intense on her face. "Of wanting something I can't have." Clara. Her name was a ragged exhale. Then he was kissing her, and the world narrowed to this moment, this connection. It wasn't a gentle kiss. It held too much, months of proximity, of careful distance, of a growing awareness they'd both tried to ignore. Clara's hands fisted in his shirt, pulling him closer, and Luke made a sound that might have been surrender. When they broke apart, both were breathing hard. Luke rested his forehead against hers, his hands tangled in her hair. "I won't dishonor our agreement," he said roughly. "If you want me to stop..." "I don't," Clara interrupted. "I don't want you to stop." They came together again, and this time there was no hesitation. Luke lifted her easily, carrying her to the bed they'd never shared. His hands were reverent as they undressed her, tracing scars she'd never let another see, marks from difficult birth, from lean years, from life's casual cruelties. "Beautiful," he murmured against her skin, and Clara believed him. Their joining was profound in its intensity, two wounded souls finding unexpected solace in each other. Luke was gentle despite his strength, attentive to her every response. Clara discovered passion she'd never known existed, her marriage to Samuel having been duty more than desire. Afterward, they lay entwined, the night sounds of the forest a familiar symphony outside. Clara traced the scars on Luke's chest, bullet wounds, knife marks, the map of a violent past. "Will you stay?" she asked quietly. "No more pallet by the fire, no more careful distance." "If you'll have me," Luke replied, pressing a kiss to her hair. "I'll have you," Clara said, and meant it in all ways. From that night forward, they were truly married. The change was subtle but profound. Luke's touch lingered when he passed her in the cabin. Clara found excuses to be near him. They moved together with new awareness, new purpose. James noticed. Of course, children always did, but he seemed pleased by the shift, as if some tension he'd sensed had finally eased. He began calling Luke Pa without prompting, the word falling naturally from his lips. The first time it happened, Luke froze, his face cycling through emotions too quickly to read. Then he ruffled the boy's hair with gruff affection. That's right. Son, I'm your PA now. Clara watched from the doorway, her heart so full it hurt. But happiness in the frontier was always fragile, always threatened. It came in the form of 3 riders approaching the cabin on a May morning, their intentions clear in the set of their shoulders, the rifles across their saddles. Luke saw them first. His body going alert in that way Clara had learned meant danger. Take James. Go to the root cellar. Luke, now! Clara! She grabbed James, but stubbornness made her pause. Together, remember? We protect each other. Luke's expression softened for just a moment. Then protect our son. If something happens, take the horses and ride for Fort Laramie. Don't stop. Clara wanted to argue, but James was already frightened, clinging to her skirts. She retreated to the root cellar. The Winchester Luke had taught her to use clutched in her hands. Through the cellar's ventilation gaps, she could hear voices. Luke Carver. The voice was cultured, cold. Harlan Wells. I heard you took a wife, the Merritt widow. My wife's name is Carver now. Luke's voice carried that dangerous calm Clara had learned to recognize. Legal technicalities. Her husband died owing me considerable money. I'm here to collect. Samuel Merritt's debts died with him. You have no claim on my wife. Perhaps not legally, but there are other forms of justice. Wells's voice hardened. You have something of a reputation. Carver, the cavalry deserter, the murderer. Did you tell your new wife how many men you killed? Did you tell her about Fort Robinson? Clara pressed her eye to the gap, could see Luke standing alone before 3 armed men. His rifle rested easy in his hands, but he hadn't raised it. I told her what mattered, Luke said evenly. Now get off my land. Or what? You'll add us to your body count? Wells laughed. An ugly sound. I think not. You've gone soft. Carver, playing house with another man's leavings. The slur against Clara made Luke's hands tighten on his rifle, but his voice remained steady. Last warning. Wells, here's my offer. Wells continued, seemingly oblivious to the danger. The woman works off the debt. My household needs a servant. A year's service should cover what's owed. The only way my wife leaves here is over my dead body. That can be arranged. The violence, when it came, was swift. Wells went for his gun, but Luke was faster. The rifle spoke once, and Wells tumbled from his horse. The other 2 men froze, hands hovering near their weapons. Your boss made his choice, Luke said, working the rifle's lever with smooth efficiency. You boys want to make yours? The men exchanged glances, then wheeled their horses around. One called back. This isn't over. Carver, Wells has friends, powerful friends. Let them come, Luke replied, after they'd gone. Taking Wells's body with them, Luke stood for a long moment in the yard. Clara emerged from the cellar. James clutched against her. Are you hurt? She asked, running her hands over him. Checking. No. Luke caught her hands, held them. But this is just the beginning. They'll be back. More of them. Then we'll be ready. Luke studied her face. I could send you away. You and James. Somewhere safe. You could try. Clara said firmly. But I'm your wife. Luke Carver, for better or worse. I'm not running. Something fierce and proud blazed in Luke's eyes. He pulled her against him, kissed her hard in the morning sun. James pressed between them. My brave girl. He murmured against her hair. My Clara. That night, they made love with desperate passion, aware that their hard-won peace was fracturing. Clara clung to Luke in the darkness, memorizing the feel of him, the sound of his breathing, the way he whispered her name. Whatever comes, she said against his chest. I regret nothing. These months with you, they've been worth everything. Luke's arms tightened around her. You saved me. Clara, I was dead inside until you fell through my door. We saved each other, she corrected. Outside, a wolf howled, and the wind spoke of gathering storms. But inside their cabin, a family held tight to each other and to the fierce love they'd found in the wilderness. The next morning brought troubling news. Luke rode to the nearest neighbor, 10 miles through rough country, and returned with a grim expression. Wells's brother is gathering men, hired guns from Cheyenne. They're saying I murdered Harlan in cold blood. But he drew first. I saw your word against theirs, and I'm already a wanted man in some territories. Luke pulled her close. Clara, I need you to listen. If something happens to me, nothing will happen, Clara said fiercely. I won't let it. Luke smiled sadly. You can't stop bullets with will alone. Love. It was the first time he'd used that word. Love. Clara's breath caught. Then teach me to stop them with lead, she said. Pride and fear warred in Luke's face, but he nodded. If trouble was coming, they'd face it together. The next days were spent in preparation. Luke taught Clara everything, how to barricade the cabin, where the extra ammunition was hidden, the escape routes through the forest. They worked side by side, and even in the shadow of danger, Clara felt the rightness of it. This was marriage, she realized. Not just the passion they shared in the dark, not just the daily routines of survival. It was standing together against the world, choosing each other again and again, no matter the cost. As she watched Luke showing James how to hide in the special place he'd built beneath the floorboards. Just a game, son, but an important one. Clara touched her belly where new life was secretly growing. She hadn't told Luke yet. Part of her feared it would make him send her away. But as he looked up and caught her watching, his face softening with an emotion too deep for words, she knew she'd tell him soon. They would face whatever came as a family. Complete, whole, theirs. The trip to Cold Pine for supplies couldn't be delayed any longer. The flour was nearly gone, and Clara needed fabric for clothing, especially with the secret she carried. Luke wanted to go alone, but Clara insisted on accompanying him. I won't hide, she said firmly. I'm not ashamed of being your wife. So they went together, James sitting between them on the wagon seat, chattering about the birds he'd seen and the frog he'd caught by the creek. It was almost possible to pretend they were just another family heading to town. The pretense shattered the moment they reached Main Street. Conversation stopped. Women pulled their children closer. Men stepped out of shops to stare. Clara kept her chin high, her hand finding Luke's on the bench beside her. At Morrison's general store, Mrs. Morrison's face went pale when they entered. Luke Carver and Mrs. Carver. The name seemed to stick in her throat. Ma'am, Clara's voice was steady. I need fabric, flour, salt pork. That is... Mrs. Morrison glanced toward the back room where her husband likely lurked. Perhaps you should try elsewhere. Perhaps you should serve paying customers, Luke said quietly. There was no threat in his tone, but Mrs. Morrison flinched as if he'd shouted. They were served, eventually, though every item seemed grudged. Clara selected her goods with deliberate care, refusing to be rushed. She'd just picked up a bolt of soft blue fabric when the bell jangled again. 3 women entered, the banker's wife, the mayor's sister, and Judge Thornton's daughter. Clara recognized them from her former life, when Samuel had been alive and their credit had been good. They'd never been friends, but they'd been cordial enough. Now they looked at her as if she were something scraped off a boot. Clara Merritt, Mrs. Thornton said, her voice dripping disdain. Or what do you call yourself now? Mrs. Luke Carver. Clara replied evenly. How convenient. Husband barely cold in the ground and you've already trapped another man. The banker's wife, Martha Pruitt, smiled poisonously. Though I suppose desperate men make desperate choices. Watch your tongue, Luke said softly. Martha's eyes glittered with malice. Oh, the killer speaks. Tell me, Mr. Carver, does she warm your bed well enough to make you forget the family you slaughtered? The words hung in the air like a physical blow. Clara saw Luke go rigid, saw the muscle jump in his jaw. She moved without thinking, stepping between him and the women. My husband is twice the man any of yours could hope to be, Clara said, her voice carrying the kind of steel that comes from defending what you love. He protects his family, provides for them, loves them, which is more than I can say for certain men in this town who spend their nights in saloons and their days counting other people's money. Martha's face flushed. Her own husband's drinking was well known, though never spoken of in polite company. "How dare you?" "How dare I what? Speak truth? Defend my husband?" Clara stepped closer. "You want to talk about convenient marriages, Martha? Should we discuss how quickly you wed old Pruitt after his first wife's mysterious death? Or you, Mrs. Thornton, didn't you trap the judge when you were already carrying another man's child?" The women gasped, but Clara wasn't finished. "You point fingers and whisper behind fans, but you know nothing of real hardship, nothing of what it takes to survive. I'm not ashamed of my choices or my husband. Can you say the same? You'll regret this." "Mrs. Thornton hissed. "Both of you. This town has ways of dealing with those who don't know their place." "Is that a threat?" Luke asked, his hand moving casually to rest on his holstered revolver. The women fled, bell jangling violently in their wake. "Mrs." Morrison quickly tallied their purchases, eager to have them gone. As they loaded the wagon, Clara's hands shook with delayed reaction. "You didn't need to do that," Luke said quietly. "Yes, I did." Clara touched his face, making him look at her. "They don't get to speak of you that way. Not ever." Something raw and vulnerable crossed Luke's features. He caught her hand, pressed a kiss to her palm. "My fierce little wife." But the confrontation had stirred the hornet's nest. As they prepared to leave town, a group of men blocked their path. Clara recognized several deputies, ranch hands, men who did Pruitt's and Wells's bidding. "Carver," the lead man said. "Heard you've been making threats against respectable women?" "Heard wrong," Luke replied, but his body had shifted, ready for trouble. "Way we heard it, your woman there insulted half the decent ladies in town. That kind of behavior needs correcting." One of the men reached for Clara. It was a mistake. Luke moved faster than thought, his fist connecting with the man's jaw with a crack that echoed off the storefronts. The man dropped, and suddenly everyone was moving. "Get in the wagon!" Luke shouted, drawing his gun but not firing, using it to keep the men at bay. Clara scrambled up, pulling James against her as Luke backed toward them. Someone threw a bottle that shattered against the wagon wheel. Shouts filled the air, ugly words about what they'd do to Luke, to her. Then a rifle shot split the air. Everyone froze. Old Tom Baxter, the preacher, stood on the church steps with a smoking Winchester. "That's enough," he roared. "You boys want to act like animals. Do it somewhere else. This is a house of God." "Preacher, this ain't your concern," one of the deputies said. "Human decency is always my concern." Tom's weathered face was stern. "Luke Carver's done nothing but defend his wife from harassment. Any man here wouldn't do the same?" The mob began to disperse, shame and anger warring on their faces. Tom approached the wagon. "You folks best head home," he said quietly. "This won't be the end of it." As they drove out of town, Clara looked back to see people still watching from doorways and windows. She understood with cold certainty that they'd crossed a line. There would be no going back. The ride home was tense, Luke constantly checking their back trail. Only when they reached the cabin did he relax slightly. "Pack what matters," he said as he helped her down. "We may need to leave quickly." "Luke, no, this is our home." "A home's no good if we're dead in it." His face was grim. "I've seen how this goes. They'll come at night, with torches and rope. We need to be ready to run." Clara wanted to argue, but she knew he was right. That evening, as she packed their few precious belongings, she finally told him. "Luke, there's something. I'm carrying your child." He went absolutely still, the shirt he'd been folding slipping from his hands. "What?" "I'm with child. Your child." Clara watched his face anxiously. "I know the timing is terrible, but—" Luke crossed to her in 2 strides, framing her face with shaking hands. "Clara, my Clara." His voice broke. A baby. Yes. Tears slipped down her cheeks. Are you angry? Angry? Luke laughed, a sound of pure wonder. How could I be angry? You're giving me... He stopped, overwhelmed. I never thought I'd have this again. A family, a future. He kissed her then, deep and desperate, his hand moving to rest protectively over her still flat stomach. When they broke apart, his eyes were fierce. This changes things, he said. I won't risk you, either of you. We leave tonight. And go where? North Montana Territory. I know people there, good people who won't care about our past. He pressed his forehead to hers. I'm sorry, Clara. I wanted to give you a real home. You are my home, she said firmly. You and James and this little one. Where we are doesn't matter. They worked through the night, preparing. But dawn came too soon, and with it, the sound of approaching horses, many horses. Luke moved to the window, face grim. They're here, at least a dozen men. Clara's heart hammered, but her hands were steady as she checked the rifle he'd taught her to use. The cellar? No, they'll burn us out. Luke was already barricading the door. We make our stand. You take the back window, I'll take the front. James, I know where to hide. Pa, the boy said bravely, though his voice trembled. Luke knelt before him. That's my brave boy. You protect your mother, understand? You're the man if something happens to me. Luke, don't, Clara began, but he silenced her with a kiss. I love you, he said simply. Both of you, all of you. Whatever happens, remember that. Outside, a voice called out. Not Wells' brother. He was too smart to come himself. But Clara recognized the sheriff's deputy, a man deep in Wells' pocket. Luke Carver, you're wanted for the murder of Harlan Wells. Come out peaceful, and your woman won't be harmed. You know that's a lie, Luke called back. You're not here for justice. Then we'll burn you out. Your choice. Carver. Clara met Luke's eyes across the cabin. He nodded slightly, and she understood. They would fight. Together. The first shot shattered the front window. Then everything exploded into chaos. Glass breaking, bullets thudding into logs, the acrid smell of gunpowder. Clara fired through the back window, saw a man fall, kept firing. Time became elastic, measured in heartbeats and muzzle flashes. Luke was a deadly force, every shot carefully placed. But there were too many, and they had only so much ammunition. Then Clara heard it, the crackling of fire. They'd set the woodshed ablaze, and the wind was carrying sparks toward the cabin. Luke! She cried. He saw it too, his face setting in grim lines. They were trapped between bullets and flames, with nowhere to run. That's when the thunder came. Not from the sky, but from the earth. Hoofbeats, dozens of them. New riders swept into the clearing, and the attacking men suddenly found themselves caught between the cabin and this new force. Clara recognized the lead rider, Tom Baxter, the preacher, armed and righteous. With him rode others, men and even women from the territory who'd heard of the mob's plan and refused to stand by. This ends now, Tom roared. You boys want to play vigilante. You go through us first. The tide turned quickly. Outnumbered now and caught in crossfire, Wells's hired guns began to retreat. Several lay wounded or dead. The sheriff's deputy tried to rally them, but a shot from Tom's rifle sent him diving for cover. Within minutes, it was over. The surviving attackers fled, leaving their wounded behind. The fire was quickly doused by willing hands. Luke emerged from the cabin, Clara close behind. Tom Baxter dismounted, his weathered face grave but satisfied. Figured you might need help, the preacher said. Not everyone in these parts holds with mob justice. Tom, Luke said, voice rough with emotion. We owe you. You owe me nothing. Man has a right to defend his home and family. Tom looked at Clara with kind eyes. You all right, Mrs. Carver? Thanks to you. Clara managed. Thanks to all of us, Tom corrected, gesturing to the others. This territory's got good people in it. We just sometimes forget to stand up to the bad ones. As the wounded were seen to and statements taken, for there would be a real law response to this, Clara found herself surrounded by unexpected allies. Women who'd stayed silent in town now pressed her hands, whispered support. Men nodded respectfully to Luke. But even in victory, Clara knew this wasn't over. Wells's brother still lived, still had influence and money. They might have won this battle, but the war would continue unless… "Luke," she said quietly that evening, after their defenders had gone. "I've been thinking." He looked up from where he was replacing the broken window. Dangerous habit. "I'm serious. We can't keep living like this, fighting off every attack, waiting for the next one." She took a breath. "I think we should leave. Start fresh somewhere else." Luke was quiet for a long moment. "You'd give up our home? To keep our family safe?" "Yes." Clara touched her belly. "This little one deserves to grow up without fear. James deserves a father who isn't always watching for the next threat. And you, what do you deserve?" "Clara." She crossed to him, took his scarred hands in hers. "I have what I want. You, our children, a life together. The where doesn't matter." Luke pulled her close, buried his face in her hair. "North then, Montana. We'll leave at first light. Together," Clara said. "Always together." Luke agreed. As they prepared for bed in their damaged but still standing cabin, Clara felt a strange peace. They'd been tested by fire, literally, and survived. Whatever came next, they'd face it as they'd faced everything else. Side by side, gun in hand if necessary. Love in their hearts always. The Wild West might be harsh, but it had made them strong, and that strength would carry them through to whatever tomorrow brought. They left at dawn, wagon loaded with everything that mattered. The cabin stood empty behind them, a monument to what they'd built and what they were brave enough to leave behind. Luke had nailed a note to the door. "Property of Luke Carver. Trespassers will be shot on sight upon my return." Clara didn't look back. Her eyes were on the horizon, on the future growing within her, on James sleeping against her shoulder. But 3 days into their journey north, that future became suddenly uncertain. The pain started as they camped by a stream. At first, Clara ignored them. They'd been traveling hard, and discomfort was expected. But when she stood to help with dinner, wetness flooded down her legs, tinged with red. "Luke," she gasped, clutching her belly. He was at her side instantly, his face draining of color as he saw the blood. "The baby? Something's wrong." Terror clawed at her throat. It was too early, far too early. "Oh God, Luke, the baby!" He lifted her carefully, carried her to the wagon bed where he'd made a pallet of blankets. His hands were gentle, but she could feel them trembling. "There's a town," he said. "Willow Creek, maybe 10 miles. They might have a doctor." "No." Clara gripped his hand. "No town. Wells might have people there." "Damn Wells!" Luke's control cracked. "Clara, you need help." But she was right, and they both knew it. News traveled fast in the territories. Any doctor might be bought, might send word. They were alone with this crisis as they'd been alone with everything else. Luke did what he could. He'd delivered foals and calves, had some battlefield medical knowledge. But this was different. This was Clara, white-faced and trying not to scream. This was their child fighting too soon to enter the world. Through that endless night, Clara drifted in and out of consciousness. The pain came in waves, each one threatening to pull her under. She was dimly aware of Luke's voice, constant and desperate, telling her to hold on, telling her he loved her, telling her stories to keep her anchored to life. "Remember when we met?" His voice broke. "You were half frozen on my doorstep. Most beautiful thing I'd ever seen, even covered in snow. Knew right then my life had changed, though I fought it hard." Clara tried to answer, but another wave of pain stole her words. She could feel the baby moving, struggling, and knew with terrible certainty that something was deeply wrong. "Pa?" James's small voice came from nearby. Luke had told him to stay in the wagon's front, but children never listened when they were scared. "Take care of your ma," Luke said roughly. "Talk to her. Let her hear your voice." So James did, in the simple way of children. He told Clara about the frog he'd seen, about the stars that looked like a bear, about how he'd help with the new baby when it came. His innocent faith was both balm and torture. The crisis came near dawn. Clara screamed then, unable to hold it back, as her body fought to expel what it couldn't nurture. Luke caught the tiny form, so small, so still, perfect in its incompleteness. "A daughter," he whispered, and Clara heard his heart break in those 2 words. She held the baby just once, memorizing the delicate features, the wisps of dark hair. Then the darkness that had been threatening finally claimed her. She woke to sunlight and the sound of digging. Every part of her hurt, but the physical pain was nothing to the emptiness in her arms. Luke was beside her immediately, his face haggard with sleepless fear. "You're awake." Relief made his voice rough. "Clara, I thought I'd lost you too." "The baby? I'm sorry." Tears tracked down his weathered cheeks. "I'm so sorry. There was nothing. I couldn't." Clara turned her face away, unable to bear his grief on top of her own. But Luke wouldn't let her retreat. He gathered her carefully against him, held her as she shattered. They stayed by that stream for 3 days while Clara recovered enough to travel. Luke had buried their daughter beneath a cottonwood tree, marked the tiny grave with stones arranged in a cross. Clara spent hours sitting beside it, one hand on the earth that held her child, the other clutching James, who seemed to understand that something precious had been lost. "We should name her," Clara said on the 3rd morning. "Mary," Luke said without hesitation. "After my first daughter, sisters, even if they never met." Clara nodded, tears fresh on her cheeks. "Mary Carver, our angel." When they finally moved on, Clara looked back until the cottonwood disappeared from view, another piece of her heart left behind in this unforgiving land. They traveled slower now, Luke stopping often to check on Clara. The bleeding had stopped, but she remained weak, wrung out by loss. James stayed close, bringing her wildflowers and pretty stones, trying in his childish way to fix what couldn't be mended. It was during one of these stops that they appeared, 6 riders coming fast from the south. Luke recognized the lead rider immediately, Wells's brother, Joseph. They'd found them. "Clara, take James and hide in those rocks," Luke said quietly, checking his weapons. But Clara was already reaching for the rifle. "No more hiding." "You're in no condition." "I'm in exactly the condition to put a bullet in anyone who threatens my family." Her eyes were hard as flint. The loss of Mary had burned away something soft in her, left only steel behind. Joseph Wells pulled up just out of easy rifle range, his men spreading out in a half circle. "Carver," he called, "you've led us quite a chase. Turn around. Wells, this doesn't concern you anymore." "My brother's dead. That concerns me greatly." Joseph's voice carried clearly. "Surrender now, and I'll make it quick. Your woman and boy can go free." Luke laughed, a harsh sound. "Like you let the Cheyenne women go free? I know your kind. Wells, you'd kill them just for spite. Then you'll all die together. Fitting end for a murderer and his whore." The word hit Clara like a physical blow. Not for herself, but for what it said about Mary, their daughter, conceived in love, dismissed as shame. She raised her rifle, sighted carefully the way Luke had taught her. "Clara," Luke warned, but she was beyond warning. The rifle cracked, and Joseph Wells tumbled from his horse, clutching his shoulder. His men scrambled for cover as Luke added his fire to hers. What followed was not a battle, but a desperate scramble for survival. Luke and Clara fought with the fury of the cornered, of parents protecting their young. James huddled behind the rocks, hands over his ears, as bullets whined overhead. One of Wells's men tried to flank them. Clara saw him coming, swung her rifle, fired. He fell. Another came from the other side. Luke's pistol spoke twice, 2 more down, but there were still 3, including the wounded Joseph, and Clara was running out of ammunition. Her body shook with exhaustion, black spots dancing at the edges of her vision. That's when they heard it. A bugle call, clear and military. Over the ridge came a patrol of cavalry, drawn by the gunfire. The surviving attackers wheeled their horses and fled. Joseph Wells slumped over his saddle. The patrol's sergeant, a grizzled veteran named O'Brien, surveyed the scene with practiced eyes. "Folks all right here?" "Now we are," Luke said carefully. His history with the military was complicated, but these weren't the men from Fort Robinson. O'Brien dismounted, took in Clara's condition, the frightened child. "Ma'am, you need medical attention. We're headed to Fort Benton. You're welcome to travel with us for protection." Clara looked at Luke. He nodded slightly. They needed help, and the fort meant safety, at least temporarily. "We're obliged, Sergeant." Clara managed. The journey to Fort Benton took 2 days. The soldiers were respectful, even kind. One young private gave James a carved whistle. Another shared his mother's remedy for Clara's weakness, a tea of herbs that actually seemed to help. At the fort, the doctor, a competent man named Whitfield, examined Clara gently. "You've been through an ordeal," he said. "The loss, I'm sorry, but you're strong. You'll heal." He paused. "You'll be able to have other children. In time." Clara nodded, unable to speak. Other children couldn't replace Mary, but knowing the possibility existed eased something in her chest. They stayed at the fort for a week, guests of the commander who turned out to know Luke from the old days. "Heard about Fort Robinson?" Major Garrett said quietly one evening. "Don't blame you one bit. Man's family comes first." "That's not how the Army saw it," Luke replied. "The Army was wrong." Garrett poured whiskey for them both. "Your record since then, well, let's say certain debts have been paid. You're free to settle anywhere in the territory. I'll see to it." It was more than Luke had dared hope for. Not forgiveness, exactly, but a chance to stop running. Clara found unexpected comfort among the fort's women. The major's wife, learning of their loss, simply held her while she cried. Other women shared their own stories of children lost to fever, accident, the harsh realities of frontier life, the sisterhood of grief. Clara discovered crossed all boundaries. "It doesn't stop hurting, Mrs." Garrett told her. "But you learn to carry it, and when the next baby comes, and there will be a next baby, you'll love that child fierce enough for 2. When they left Fort Benton, it was with supplies, directions to good land near the Judith River, and something more valuable, hope. They found the place Luke had heard about, a valley protected by ridges, with good water and grass. The previous homesteader had given up, but his cabin still stood, solid if neglected. "Home?" Luke asked, watching Clara survey the land. She thought of all the homes she'd lost, the ranch burned by Wells, the cabin they'd defended and left behind. But home, she'd learned, wasn't walls and roof. It was the man beside her, the boy playing in the grass, the memory of a daughter held however briefly. Home, she agreed. They set about making it theirs. Luke repaired the cabin, built furniture, dug irrigation channels. Clara planted a garden, made curtains from fabric bought at Fort Benton, created civilization from wilderness as women had always done. James thrived, growing brown and strong. He helped Luke with chores, learned his letters from Clara, brought them both joy when sorrow threatened to overwhelm, and slowly, carefully, like green shoots after fire, Clara and Luke began to heal. They would speak of Mary sometimes. Late at night, how she would have had Clara's eyes, Luke's stubborn chin, how James would have been the best big brother. The marker by the cottonwood tree was far away now, but Mary traveled with them in memory and love. As summer turned to autumn in their valley, Clara felt the stirrings of hope that perhaps, they might try again. One night, as they sat watching the sunset paint the ridges gold, Clara took Luke's hand and placed it on her belly. His eyes widened with understanding and not a little fear. "Are you sure?" he asked. "I'm sure." Clara leaned into his strength. "Spring, baby, if I figure right." Luke pulled her close, pressed his lips to her hair. "This time," he vowed, "this time we'll be ready. Doctor nearby. Everything proper? This time. Clara agreed. We know what we're fighting for. As darkness fell over their valley, they held each other and dared to hope. The West had taken much from them. Innocence, certainty, a daughter who would live only in their hearts. But it had given them this, a love forged in fire, a family bound by choice and chance, a future wrestled from an unforgiving land. They were no longer the desperate widow and bitter exile who'd met in a blizzard. They were Luke and Clara Carver, survivors and partners, building something lasting in a place that devoured the weak. And in the spring, God willing, they would be four again. The winter was mild in their valley, a blessing Clara took as a sign. Her belly grew round with new life while snow blanketed the ridges. Luke fussed over her constantly, wouldn't let her carry water or chop wood, watched her with eyes that held both joy and terror. "I'm not made of glass," Clara told him one February morning as he tried to stop her from collecting eggs. "You're carrying our child," Luke replied stubbornly. "That makes you precious as gold and twice as fragile." But Clara was stronger this time, knew better what her body needed. She drank the teas the fort women had taught her about, rested when tired, and felt the baby's movements with wonder instead of fear. Doctor Whitfield from Fort Benton had agreed to come when her time was near. Luke had already made the journey twice to ensure the man understood the urgency. Money wasn't discussed. Luke would pay whatever it took to have skilled hands nearby. It was in early March when the real trouble found them again. Not Wells this time. Joseph had died from infection after their last encounter. His men scattered. This threat was older, deeper, and far more dangerous. Luke recognized him immediately when he rode up to their cabin. Thomas Garrett, not the helpful major from Fort Benton, but his younger brother, one of the soldiers from Fort Robinson, one of the men who'd been there when Sarah and little Mary died. "Hello, Luke," Thomas said, dismounting slowly. He was alone, which was either very brave or very stupid. "Been looking for you a long time." Luke stood on the porch, rifle in hand but not raised. "Thomas, thought you were dead." "Almost was. You're a good shot, but not quite good enough." Thomas touched his side where old scars lay hidden. "Took me years to heal up, years to track you down. What do you want?" Though Luke knew, had always known this day would come. "Justice. For the brothers you killed. For the life you ruined." Thomas's eyes flicked to the cabin. "Heard you took another wife, another family. How's that sit with Sarah's memory?" "You don't speak her name," Luke said quietly, dangerously. "Not you, not ever. I remember her, you know, pretty thing, cried for you at the end. Her and the little one both." Luke moved so fast Thomas barely had time to react. The rifle butt caught him across the jaw, sent him sprawling. Luke stood over him, weapon trained on his chest. "Give me one reason not to end this now," Luke growled. Thomas spat blood, smiled redly. "Because you've gone soft. Carver, because you got something to lose again." He raised his voice. "Isn't that right, Mrs. Carver?" Clara stood in the doorway, her own rifle steady in her hands despite her swollen belly. "Luke, who is this?" "Ghost from the past," Luke said without taking his eyes off Thomas. "One that should have stayed buried. Your husband's a murderer, lady." Thomas called out. "Killed 6 of his own men, good soldiers, patriots, men who slaughtered women and children." Clara replied coldly. "I know the story. I know what you did." Thomas's smile faltered. "He tell you he went crazy? Shot us in the back? That he's wanted for treason?" "He told me he tried to stop a massacre, that he failed, that he's been paying for it ever since." Clara stepped onto the porch, massive with child but magnificent in her fury. "Now get off our land before I decide the world needs one less butcher." "This isn't over." Thomas struggled to his feet. "I'll be back, with proof, with papers, with the law." "Then come legal," Luke said. "Come in daylight with honest men, but come sneaking around my family again, and I'll bury you where you stand." Thomas mounted awkwardly, jaw already swelling. "You can't run forever. Carver, not running anymore." Luke replied, "This is my ground. My stand. Remember that." After Thomas rode off, Luke turned to find Clara white-faced and shaking. He caught her as her knees buckled. "The baby," she gasped. "Luke, something's happening." Fear colder than any winter seized him. It was too soon. Weeks too soon. But Clara's body had its own timeline. He carried her inside, sent James racing on horseback to Fort Benton for the doctor, and tried to keep his terror locked away where it couldn't touch her. "Not again," Clara moaned between contractions. "Please God, not again." "This is different," Luke told her, praying it was true. "You're stronger. We're ready. The doctor will come." The hours stretched like days. Clara fought with everything she had, and Luke matched her strength for strength. When she screamed, he held her. When she wept, he wiped her tears. When she said she couldn't go on, he reminded her of who she was. "You're Clara Carver," he said fiercely. "You survived blizzards and bullets. You stood off Wells and his men. You brought love back to a dead man's heart. You can do this." Dr. Whitfield arrived as the sun was setting. James clinging to his back. The boy had ridden hard, pushing the doctor's horse to its limits. The man took one look at Clara and went to work. "Baby's early, but positioned right," he said after examining her. "This is going to be work, Mrs. Carver. But I've delivered plenty of early babies who thrived. Don't give up on me." Clara didn't give up. She pushed when told, rested between, trusted the doctor's steady hands and Luke's fierce love. And just as the moon rose full and bright, their daughter entered the world. She was small but perfect, with lusty cries that filled the cabin. Dr. Whitfield cleaned her, checked her carefully, then placed her in Clara's arms. "Healthy as can be expected," he pronounced. "Keep her warm, feed her often, and I think you'll raise this one to womanhood." Clara wept then. Great healing sobs as she held this miracle child. Luke wrapped his arms around both of them, his own tears falling freely. "What's her name?" James asked, peering at his tiny sister with wonder. Clara and Luke exchanged glances. They'd discussed this, planned for this moment they'd hardly dared believe would come. "Hope," Clara said softly. "Hope Sarah Carver, for the future and the past." The doctor stayed 3 days to monitor mother and child. Both thrived. Hope was small but fierce, nursing strongly, already showing the stubbornness that would serve her well. It was the 4th morning when Thomas Garrett returned, but not alone, and not as expected. Luke saw them coming, a full military patrol, flags flying officially. His heart sank, after everything, to lose it all now. But when they drew closer, he recognized the lead officer, Major Garrett from Fort Benton, Thomas's older brother, his face stern with purpose. "Luke Carver," the major called formally. "I need a word." Luke stepped out, knowing Clara watched from the window with hope at her breast. Whatever came, his family would see him face it standing. "Major," Luke acknowledged. "My brother came to me, told me you were here, told me old stories." Major Garrett dismounted, approached slowly, made accusations, demands for justice, and I told him that Luke Carver died at Fort Robinson 5 years ago, that the man living in this valley is a respected homesteader with a wife and children who has never caused trouble for anyone who didn't come looking for it. Luke stared, hardly daring to understand. "Major? The past is dead. Mr. Carver, let it lie." Garrett's eyes were compassionate but firm. "My brother has been reassigned to a post in Alaska. He won't trouble you again. As far as the Army is concerned, you don't exist." "Why?" Luke had to ask. "Your brother—" "My brother was at Fort Robinson. I know what he was part of, what you tried to stop." Garrett extended his hand. "Some debts can't be paid, some sins can't be forgiven. But a man can choose to do better with his second chance. You have. That's enough for me." Luke shook the offered hand, throat too tight for words. After the patrol left, Luke found Clara nursing Hope by the fire, James playing quietly nearby. His family, his redemption, his reason for drawing breath. "It's over," he told her. "Really over. We're free." Clara reached for him with her free hand. "We've been free since the day I knocked on your door. Just took us a while to realize it." That spring and summer passed in a blur of ordinary miracles. Hope grew round and rosy. James learned to read from Clara's precious books. The garden flourished, neighbors began to settle the valley, and Luke found himself welcomed among them, his past unknown or ignored, his present self all that mattered. It was August when Clara found Luke standing by the small grave he'd made behind the house, a marker for their first marry. Though her body lay far to the south. "Do you think she knows?" Clara asked softly. "About hope, about our happiness?" "I think she's part of it," Luke replied, drawing Clara close. "Her and my Sarah both. Love doesn't die. Clara, it just changes shape." They stood together in the evening light, surrounded by all they'd built and all they'd lost, complete in their incompleteness. Tomorrow there would be work, hay to cut, meals to cook, children to raise. But tonight there was only this, a man and woman who'd found each other in the depths of winter and chosen to bloom despite the frost. "I love you, Luke Carver," Clara said, words she spoke often now, no longer afraid of their power. "And I love you, Clara Carver," he replied. "Until the mountains fall and after." Inside the cabin, Hope cried for her supper. James called for them to come see the frog he'd caught. Life, ordinary and extraordinary, called them back. They went together, hand in hand, into their future, behind them. The grave stood peaceful in the dying light, watched over by the eternal stars and the turning seasons. Ahead lay years they couldn't foresee. More children, perhaps, certainly more challenges, but also love, deep and abiding. Strong enough to weather any storm. The Wild West had tested them with everything it had. Death, violence, loss, judgment. They'd survived it all. More than survived. They'd built something beautiful from the ashes of their separate griefs. They'd found home not in a place, but in each other. And that, Clara thought as she took Hope from her cradle, as she watched Luke lift James to his shoulders, as her heart swelled with a joy too large for words, that was the greatest victory of all. The cabin door closed softly behind them, shutting out the vast Wyoming night, but inside, warmed by fire and love. The Carver family was complete at last, battered but not broken, scarred but not defeated. Together, always together. 5 years had passed since Hope's birth, and the Carver homestead had become one of the most prosperous in the valley. The cabin had grown too, with proper rooms added for the children and a wide porch where Clara could sit and watch the sunset paint the mountains gold. Hope was a sturdy child of 5 now, with her mother's dark hair and her father's gray eyes, fearless as a wolf pup and twice as wild. James, at 13, had grown tall and responsible, helping Luke with the ranch work and still calling him Pa with quiet pride. It was a Sunday afternoon in late summer when Clara noticed Luke building something behind the barn. He'd been secretive about it for weeks, disappearing with lumber and tools, refusing to say what occupied his time. "What's Pa making?" Hope asked, tugging at Clara's skirts. "I don't know. Sweetheart, shall we go see?" They found Luke putting finishing touches on a small wooden structure. As Clara drew closer, her breath caught. It was a schoolhouse, 1 room, but proper, with real windows and a bell tower. "Luke," she breathed. "What have you done?" He turned, sawdust in his hair, looking pleased and embarrassed in equal measure. "Valley's got enough families now. Children need learning. Figured you might want to teach again." Clara's eyes filled. She'd mentioned once, years ago, how she'd taught school before marrying Samuel. Luke had remembered. "Besides," he continued gruffly, "our Hope will need schooling soon. Rather have her mother teaching than some stranger." Clara kissed him there in the sunlight, not caring that the children giggled. "Luke Carver, you impossible, wonderful man." The school opened that September with 8 pupils. Hope the youngest, James helping with the older children. Clara was in her element, bringing learning to this wild place. watching young minds open like flowers. Luke often stopped by during the day, supposedly to check the building, but really to watch Clara work. The sight of her there, patient and passionate, surrounded by children, filled something in him he hadn't known was empty. One evening, as autumn touched the valley with gold, a wagon appeared on their road. Luke tensed. Old habits died hard, but relaxed when he recognized Tom Baxter, the preacher who'd married them. "Tom," Luke greeted him. "Been too long." "That it has." Tom climbed down stiffly. He was older now, his traveling days nearly done. Came to see how the family's grown, and to bring news from Cold Pine. They welcomed him in, and over Clara's good cooking. Tom shared the changes in their old town. The Morrisons had moved away. Martha Pruitt had died in childbirth. The town itself was struggling, many families moving to where the railroad was building. "And there's this," Tom said, producing a leather pouch. "From the bank. Seems they've found some error in Samuel Merritt's accounts. Money owed to his widow." Clara stared at the pouch, heavy with coins. After all this time, conscience is a funny thing, Tom said quietly. Sometimes it takes years to speak up. The banker said to tell you he was sorry for how things were handled. Luke and Clara exchanged glances. They didn't need the money now, but once. "We'll put it aside for the children's future," Clara decided, "for their education beyond what I can teach." That night, after Tom had bedded down in the barn, Luke found Clara standing by her garden in the moonlight. Summer's growth was fading, but she'd coaxed beauty from the soil, as she did with everything she touched. "Regrets?" he asked softly, knowing she was thinking of those hard days. "No." Clara leaned back against him. "Every step led us here, even the pain, especially the pain." "Mrs. Thornton was right about one thing," Luke mused. "You did trap me." Clara turned in his arms, ready to protest, but saw the smile playing at his lips. "Trapped me good and proper," he continued. "Made me love again when I thought I was done with such things. Made me believe in tomorrow when I could only see yesterday." "Lucas Matthew Carver," Clara said, using his full name as she did when moved. "Are you going soft on me?" "Been soft since the day you fell through my door," he admitted. "Just took me a while to admit it." They stood together, comfortable in their silence. When Hope's voice carried from the house, "Mama, Papa, come quick!" They rushed inside to find Hope and James pressed against the window, staring out at the northern sky. Sheets of green light danced across the stars. Aurora Borealis? Rare this far south. "It's magic," Hope breathed. "It's beautiful," James added, trying to sound mature but failing to hide his wonder. Luke lifted Hope to his shoulders while Clara pulled James close. They watched the lights dance, a family whole and wondering. "Tell us a story, Pa," Hope demanded. "About the lights." Luke glanced at Clara, who nodded encouragingly. He'd become the storyteller over the years, his tales of warriors and wind replacing darker memories. "Well now," Luke began, "those lights are the spirits of all who love true, dancing their joy across heaven's floor." As his voice wove magic from the ordinary, Clara felt a deep contentment settle in her bones. This was what they'd built from the ashes of their former lives, not just a home or a ranch, but a place where love could flourish, where children could grow strong and unafraid, where the past informed but didn't imprison. The next morning brought unexpected visitors. 3 women appeared at Clara's school, tentative, travel-worn, but determined. Clara recognized the look. She'd worn it herself once. "We heard," one said hesitantly, "that you teach anyone who wants to learn, even women like us." Widows. Clara understood. Women with pasts. Women the respectable folks turned away. "Anyone who wants to learn is welcome here," Clara said firmly. "Can you be here Mondays and Wednesdays after the children's lessons?" The women's faces transformed with gratitude. As they left, chattering excitedly, Luke appeared in the doorway. "Starting something new?" he asked. "Maybe, These women need more than letters and numbers. They need skills to support themselves, to not be dependent on—" She gestured helplessly. "On men who might take advantage." Luke finished. "You want to teach them to be independent? Is that foolish? That's Clara." He kissed her forehead. "Never foolish, sometimes dangerous, always right." The adult classes began, teaching not just reading and writing, but accounts, legal basics, even marksmanship at Luke's insistence. Word spread. Soon, women were traveling from 3 valleys away to attend Clara's classes. It wasn't without controversy. Some men grumbled about wives getting ideas, but Luke's presence, silent and protective, kept the grumbling from becoming action. Nobody wanted to cross Luke Carver, the man who'd faced down Wells and his gang, who'd built a small empire from nothing. 1 year became 2, then 3. The school grew. Hope proved brilliant like her mother, challenging Clara to keep up with her quick mind. James, now 16, began talking of college back east, a dream made possible by Samuel's recovered money and the ranch's prosperity. It was James who brought home the newspaper from town, his face troubled. "Ma, Pa, you need to see this." Clara read aloud. "Former cavalry officer publishes memoir, details Fort Robinson massacre. Captain William Harding reveals truth about the tragedy. Honors unnamed soldier who tried to prevent slaughter." Luke had gone very still. Clara continued reading. The article detailed what Luke had never fully told, how he'd stood against his unit, trying to save the innocents, how he'd been branded a traitor for his conscience, how he'd disappeared after taking justice into his own hands. "He doesn't name you," Clara said softly. "Doesn't matter. Some will know." Luke's face was stone, but Clara saw the emotion beneath. "Good," James said fiercely. "Let them know. Let them know my PA is a hero." "I'm no hero, son. You are to me." Hope piped up, climbing into Luke's lap. "You saved Mama? You saved us." Luke held his daughter close, looking over her head at Clara. She saw the question there. Would this bring trouble? Would their hard-won peace shatter? But Clara had learned something in these years of building and growing. The past had power only if you let it. They'd faced worse than old stories in newspapers. They'd survived. "Let them know," she said firmly. "We have nothing to hide, nothing to be ashamed of." The story did bring visitors, journalists wanting interviews, historians seeking truth. Luke turned them all away, but politely. His story was his own, not for public consumption. But it also brought unexpected allies, former soldiers who'd struggled with similar choices, families of survivors who wanted to thank the unnamed soldier who'd tried. The narrative that had painted Luke as villain slowly shifted, replaced by a more complex truth. Through it all, life continued, seasons turned, children grew. Love deepened like wine aging in oak, growing richer and more complex with time. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Luke surprised Clara with a trip to Denver, their first real time away from the ranch. They stayed in a fine hotel, attended the theater, walked streets lit by gas lamps. But on their last night, Clara found Luke on the hotel balcony, staring out at the city lights. "Missing home?" she asked, slipping her arms around him. "Missing you," he said, turning to hold her. "You're right here, and I'm missing you." "Luke?" "In the play tonight, when the actor said, 'Home is where the heart is,' I realized something." He cupped her face in his weathered hands. "My heart's been yours since that first night. You are my home, Clara, not the ranch, not the valley, you." Clara kissed him then, pouring all her love into the connection. When they broke apart, she was crying and laughing at once. "You really have gone soft. Luke Carver. Your fault entirely. Clara Carver." They returned to find the ranch thriving under James's temporary management, Hope teaching the younger children their letters with serious determination. Their family gathered around the dinner table that night, sharing stories of the days apart, and Clara felt the circle of their love like a physical thing. Later, Luke took her to the small cemetery he'd made on the hill overlooking the valley. 3 markers stood there now, one for each Mary, and a new one for Sarah and the first Hope. He came here sometimes. Clara knew, not in grief but in remembrance. "I told them about you," he said quietly. "About our life. I think they'd be glad." Clara took his hand. "They loved you. They'd want your happiness." "I am happy," Luke said, and the wonder in his voice after all these years still moved her. "Despite everything, because of everything, I'm happy." As they walked back to the house, their children's laughter carrying on the evening air, Clara thought about the journey that had brought them here, a desperate widow and a bitter recluse, thrown together by a blizzard and bound by necessity. Who could have imagined they'd build this life? Who could have predicted that convenience would become devotion, that two broken hearts could mend each other? The West had tested them with everything it had: weather, violence, loss, judgment. But it had also given them this: a love story written in struggle and survival, in daily choices to stay, to fight, to believe in tomorrow. As they reached the porch, Luke paused. "Clara, would you marry me again if you had the choice, knowing everything?" Clara looked at him, this man who'd saved her, challenged her, loved her with a depth she'd never dreamed possible, who'd given her children a home, a purpose, who taught her that love wasn't just the passion of youth, but the steady flame that warmed you through all seasons. "Every day," she said simply. "I choose you every day?" And she did, in small moments, in grand gestures, in silence and in laughter, in the ordinariness of shared life that was itself extraordinary. They'd written their love story on the canvas of the frontier, and it would endure long after they were gone. In their children, in the school that educated generations, in the lives they'd touched and changed. The Wild West had made them, but they'd made something of it in return, a testament to the power of love to transform, to heal, to create beauty from ashes. And that, perhaps, was the greatest adventure of all. As they entered their home, hand in hand as always, the sunset painted the sky in shades of rose and gold. Another day ending, another day survived and cherished. Another day in the life they'd built together, against all odds, in defiance of all expectations. Tomorrow would bring its own challenges, but tonight the Carver family was safe, was whole, was home, and that was enough. More than enough. It was everything. Thank you so much for listening to this Wild West love story. We're curious to know where in the world you're enjoying this tale. Please share in the comments below. Don't forget to subscribe to the From Wild West channel for more stories of love, survival, and triumph in the American frontier. We'd love to hear your thoughts about Clara and Luke's journey. What touched your heart the most? Share your feelings with us and join our community of Western romance lovers.